Should Joe Biden really run for president again?
Read the polls, Jack.
Today, we're going to break down the arguments for and against a second term for the current president. And as always, I'll offer you my take. Hey everybody, I'm Isaac Saul and welcome to the Tangle YouTube channel. Today we're going to break down the arguments over Biden 2024 with what both sides are saying. I'm going to offer you a little bit of what I think, and as always, we're going to try and treat this with some sensitivity. I know people feel very strongly about this topic. First, let's kick it off with the basics. President Joe Biden is planning to run for office again. He is currently, effectively, unchallenged by any other serious contenders in the Democratic Party. Though that's not to say there aren't some people running. There are a few, actually. The 80-year-old longtime senator would be 82 at the beginning of his second term and 86 years old when it ends. This, along with his public appearance, has a lot of people on the right and the left questioning whether he should run for office again. We're going to explore that question, and to be clear, this is not a question of Biden's policies. This is not about what Democratic policies are doing to the country. This is not about whether his plans for the country are good, or even if he has been a good or bad president, which is in the eye of the beholder. This is first and foremost about his capacity to be president. It's not just a simple question of is he too old, but also is he capable of doing the job, or is he even the one running the country right now? Is the person Americans elected to be president actually still able to do the job they want him to do? One of the big reasons this question exists in the first place is because of those public appearances where Biden has looked or seen frail or aging or maybe sometimes even confused. To give some context here, I think we should share a few of the clips that have really gotten people talking.
And there's an awful lot of stories that are told, probably a bunch apocryphal about former prime minister, like you take baths up that, anyway.
Wandering around at 3 a.m. Yeah, Winston Churchill.
By the way, I met with, who are those guys that fly over shortly? You heard of them, haven't you? And we cheer for Muslim athletes like Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. I know him, and I mispronounce his name.
Now that I have a drink, maybe let's share a couple more.
It is noteworthy that the percentage of women who register to vote and cast a ballot is consistently higher than the percentage of the men who do so. End of quote. Repeat the line. Women,
which will affect the lives of generations to come. You are in a position of extraordinary power. You can change forever the trajectory we are on. You can make a world that is once again full of hope, not fear.
All right, so that is what has people talking and maybe worried about the current president's age. To be fair, though, this is not how Biden always looks or seems when he does public appearances. In order to illustrate that, I think it'd only be really truly balanced to share some footage of him when I think he's at his best, when he looks like the young, vivacious senator many Americans reelected over and over again in Delaware and then put into the White House in the year 2020. So let's run a few of those clips too.
with the American Rescue Plan and other actions, we started to grow the economy from the bottom up and the middle out. Rescue checks and tax cuts for working families that gave them just a little bit of breathing room. All told, we've created more than 12,000 jobs since I took office, nearly 8,000 of them manufacturing jobs. That means overall, we've created more jobs in 2 years than any administration has created in the first 4 years. And I think all this matters. It's no accident. The way I look at it, and Bidenomics is just another way of saying restoring the American dream. I believe every American willing to work hard should be able to get a job, no matter where they live, raise their kids on a good paycheck, take care of their health care for their families.
Nevertheless, the polling data here tells a pretty clear story. 67% of Americans, including nearly half of Democrats, 48%, think that Biden is too old for another term. Given that nearly half of all Democrats want to see another candidate, today we are not going to follow our normal left-right format. Instead, we're going to share arguments for and against Biden running for re-election. After we do that, I'll share some of my personal thoughts. And before we jump in, I just want to remind people one more time that this is not supposed to be an analysis of the job Biden has done as president. This is more about whether Biden has the capacity to run for president again in 2024. So let's jump in with the people who are saying that he should not run again. First up, we're going to start with Jeremy Meyer from USA Today. Jeremy said conventional wisdom says that it is too late for a strong Democrat to challenge President Joe Biden for the 2024 presidential nomination, and that any such challenge would hurt Biden and let the GOP win the White House. That conventional wisdom is wrong. How can someone run against Biden and not hurt him? In two ways. First, the challenger needs to promise fellow Democrats from the start that they won't attack Biden on policy or personal issues like his age or his son's legal problems. Second, and equally important, they will campaign with a blank calendar for July to November of 2024. But isn't it too late? There's not enough time to raise the money or put staff together in the early states, right? The speed with which social media moves ideas and the rapidity with which the internet allows fundraising to happen means that someone, say a popular Democratic governor, could announce in September that they are running and raise millions in a few days. In 2016, Trump ran a lean campaign that relied heavily on social media. An insurgent Democrat could do the same. Effectively, Meyer is arguing that Democrats need to have a plan B in the event something does happen to Biden or he has to drop out. Meanwhile, in the Chicago Sun-Times, Neil Steinberg said, "No wonder we cling to the dry shore. Nobody wants to leave the party, but is that a smart governmental strategy?" The McConnell episode, when he had that moment in Congress,
and a string of
that episode is a reminder that anything can happen at any time. It can come for you in the middle of a news conference, and the older you are, the closer you are to whatever is going to eventually come and get you. That's why those handicapping the 2024 election are deluding themselves. The life expectancy of an 80-year-old man is 7 years, meaning that should Biden be re-elected, the oldest president ever, he'd be pushing his luck to reach the end of his term. In The Atlantic, Elliot A. Cohen said, "I am deeply grateful to Joe Biden. By defeating Donald Trump in 2020, he rescued this country from the continuing misrule of a dangerous grifter and a serial liar, a man gripped with vindictiveness, lawlessness, and egomania." By contrast, Biden presented himself correctly as a decent, experienced, and entirely normal politician. He may have even saved his country. Americans owe him a profound debt of respect and appreciation. He also has no business running for president at the age of 80. I say that with considerable feeling, being in my late 60s and knowing that my 70s are not far off. A lot of the cliches about growing older are, unfortunately, entirely correct. Age comes with fewer filters, less patience for fools or for mere contradiction, and a great deal more of "listen to me, kid, I was doing this before you were born." If this sounds a bit like Biden, it should. So, the president is old, we should have a backup plan. He is probably out of his league, even though many people respect what he did for the country. That's the general gist of the people who look at him and think, this guy can't possibly get the job done for another 4 years. Before we continue, if you feel like you're getting any value out of what we're providing here at Tangle, we'd really appreciate it if you would hit subscribe, like the video, and turn on notifications. All these things help us with the algorithm and tells YouTube there's an audience out there who wants an honest look at views from across the political spectrum. And if you happen to be Star Wars whiskey, you can hit me up for a sponsorship, because this is the second time I've put your whiskey in my videos, which is a strong indication of how things are going in our country right now. All right, with that out of the way, let's jump into the people who still support President Joe Biden running in 2024. In the New Republic, Michael Tomasky said, "Hell yes, Joe Biden should run again." Cheers, Michael, for getting "hell yes" into a headline at your news publication. That's awesome. What do I think? I'm a big yes, Tomasky said. I was not in late 2021, but he's turned me around. The legislative accomplishments are bigger than any in my adult lifetime. There will be no more of those in the next 2 years, but the Justice Department and the Labor Department and the Federal Trade Commission and other executive agencies can still do a lot. And if the Democrats hit a trifecta in 2024, Biden is reelected, they recapture the House and somehow hang on to the Senate, then I would anticipate some form of filibuster reform that will enable the party to pass voting rights legislation, raise the minimum wage, do more on climate change, and increase taxes on the wealthy to finance various policies to support working people. If that happens, 2025 could look like a replay of 1933 and FDR's 100 days. There's never been a perfect candidate for president. Still, while we can acknowledge some of Biden's shortcomings, he nevertheless ticks a lot of boxes. A party that's united behind a competent leader who's a decent and compassionate human being, who's also embracing a more populist economic agenda than the party has in decades, I'll take that in a heartbeat. Now, he just has to win. In Vox, Dylan Matthews said just 6 presidents out of the previous 45 have chosen not to run for re-election. The last 2 who didn't, Harry Truman and Lyndon Johnson, were accidental presidents who ascended due to the previous president's death, though they did each win a general election outright, and both were embroiled in brutal and increasingly unpopular wars at the time they declined to run. You have to go back to Rutherford B. Hayes in 1880 for a situation that would be analogous to Biden declining to run for re-election. A president who won election in their own right and then chose not to run again. And Hayes had pledged in his 1876 campaign to only serve 1 term. Taking together all these factors, the case for Biden running again is simple. Joe Biden has been a pretty good president. He stands a better chance of winning the presidency in 2024 than any other Democrat. Those points alone should suffice. In The Guardian, Margaret Sullivan said Biden has done a far better job than most who voted for him could have hoped for or even imagined. Biden also put the first black woman on the Supreme Court, has successfully led the West's support for Ukraine, and, however chaotically, got the US out of the quagmire in Afghanistan. He also is difficult for his opponents to label as a raving radical leftist, since his background simply doesn't bear that out, and because his entire persona is that of your aw shucks uncle. Biden is flawed, no doubt, but could any of the aforementioned Democrats, all the others, have done as well? Could any of them in 2020 have beaten Trump, the worst threat to American democracy in modern history? And do any of them stand as good a chance in 2024 against Trump? So the answer to who should be the Democratic nominee is easy. The Trump slayer, Joseph R. Biden Jr. Yes, the very guy who's too old and not especially popular, and the one who doesn't speak all that eloquently and has been kicking around American politics since his election in the Senate in 1972 when he was just 29. All right, that is it for the folks arguing against and for Joe Biden running again in 2024, which brings us to my take. For those of you who are just joining us, my take is where I give you my opinions on all the information we just shared. This is not meant to persuade you in any way, just my thoughts and perspective, and the hope is you will all leave your thoughts and comments down below. We want this channel to be a place for the Tangle community to connect and share. So whether you agree or disagree with me or anyone sharing, just keep it respectful and remember that we are all people looking to just get a little bit closer to the truth. So, is Biden too old to be president? The answer might not be as simple as you think. It's actually pretty simple. He's way too old to be president. Let me start by saying that this is a totally legitimate conversation to have. It isn't ageist to explore this question. We're talking about the president and the real question of whether he is capable to serve or not. I know from touching on this subject occasionally in the newsletter that it pisses a lot of people off, and I very much hate some of the responses I get to my own commentary about Biden's state of mind or his capacity to be president. The simple truth is, when you watch stuff like this,
America is a nation that can be defined in a single word. I was going to put him and Aqua and his little shroud.
it is a totally normal response to wonder if he is perfectly okay or, to break out the whiskey. And I say that as somebody who is not a rabid anti-Biden voter. I'm not somebody who thinks he's the worst thing to ever happen to US politics. On the contrary, I'm somebody who just genuinely wants to know that the person sitting in the White House is 100% capable of doing the job we've asked him to do. To that end, I think there are two ways to frame this question. One is just as some normal non-political person or perhaps a Republican, and the other is if you have the interest of the Democratic Party and that agenda top of mind. If you're a conservative or you're just someone looking at this without a political horse in the race, I think the answer is actually pretty simple. Biden is old.
You're too old for this.
Very old.
Old as
and looking older by the day.
Damn! I'm sorry.
I have genuine concerns about his capacity to do the job, and I think the clips we see of him misremembering things, misnaming people, or generally just looking frail and slow are legitimate videos that should alarm some of us. And to be clear, this doesn't mean all old people are incapable of doing the job of president. In fact, I think there are plenty of people in Congress who are above the age of 80 who can do their job pretty well still. I think there are others who I am deeply concerned about.
What have I heard about what?
About your return. How have they felt about your return?
No, I haven't been gone.
Okay.
I also have some deeply personal experience with this. A few years ago, I lost my grandmother at the age of 97 years old. She was one of the sharpest, smartest, most with it people I knew, even up until she died at the age of 97. Now, I don't know if I would have voted for her for president, though we would have had a lot of awesome happy hours. But I do think for much of her life, she had the mental capacity to do a very taxing job. She was somebody who showed me that people all age differently. She happened to age with her mind firmly intact and her brain sharp as ever until the day that she died. But being president is not the same as being a grandmother. It doesn't require just playing gin with your grandchildren like me. Being president is the hardest job in the world. It requires making super difficult life and death decisions. It requires traveling all over the country and the world. It requires taking in an unbelievable amount of information every single day. So I don't blame any Americans who look at Biden and think he might not be up for it anymore. Yes, this has been a fairly normal presidency so far, but that doesn't mean it couldn't go south quickly. And it certainly doesn't mean, with a high risk of him not even making it through a second term, that we should just re-elect him. It's not even a simple question about, God forbid, him having some major health episode and perhaps even dying. It's a question about whether halfway through his term, people around him just decide he can no longer do the job and he has to step down, and whoever is his vice president right now, Kamala Harris, takes over for him. That leaves us with some very big questions. All of this is reflected in the data, and I actually think my position here is pretty in line with most of Americans, a huge number of whom think he is too old and also don't want a Biden-Trump rematch, which is something I don't really want either. On the other hand, there are the issues of the Democratic Party. These are real questions too. Who is best to beat Trump? Who is best to keep the majority in the Senate or win a majority in the House? And if not Biden, who are the alternatives? Who do you replace him with? Pete Buttigieg? Kamala Harris? I think Biden is too old and he doesn't seem great to me, but there's no way Democrats pull him. If they did, they'd be faced with some really serious questions about whether they could beat Trump in a general election. And for the party right now, that's just way too big of a risk. That being said, I do want to say that if they were to pull him, I think there's a pretty good replacement waiting in the shadows right now, and that is California Governor Gavin Newsom. Now, again, I'm not endorsing Gavin Newsom. We don't make endorsements at Tangle, and there's a lot about Gavin Newsom that I don't particularly like. But I was struck recently when I saw him interviewed on Sean Hannity, yes, on Fox News, an interview Joe Biden seemingly would never do, and he seemed much more capable of defending the Biden administration than Biden, or really frankly anyone from Biden's administration I've seen as of late. Take a look at this.
On every measure, from the economy, inflation, borders, energy, national security, he's missing in action.
Let's talk about them in order. Let's
hang on.
Wait, but I want to challenge the premise. You said the economy, 13.1 million jobs he's created. More.
These are post-COVID jobs. Okay. You know that. That's an artificial number.
No. Then let me stipulate this as an opportunity to engage civilly on this.
Okay.
Fair point. Your president, Donald Trump, lost 2.6 million jobs during his 4 years. We've created 13.1 million. Fine, you can maintain a COVID frame. How about the fact that Joe Biden's created more jobs, 6 times more jobs than the previous 3 Republican presidents combined?
So again, since the Democratic Party is definitely not going to replace Biden at this point, and maybe with good reason, you need a lot of time and money to set up a presidential campaign. I don't want to sit here and act like there aren't viable alternatives. I think there are, whether it's Newsom or any of the many other high-profile Democrats that exist in the Senate, in the House, and in governors' mansions across the country. For now, though, the answer from the Democratic Party is going to be Biden. I suspect it will remain Biden for a very long time. So what's my take in a nutshell? My take is that in a vacuum, if you are interested in the health of this country, democracy, the White House, the presidency, you probably shouldn't want someone at Biden's age showing the kind of signals that he's showing right now to be president. I don't think I would vote for him if that was the simple question. Biden right now at this age or not? Unfortunately, that is not the question that we have before us. This is a presidential election, which means there is an opponent, and that opponent happens to be Donald Trump. And the decision right now is being made by the Democratic Party, who I think wisely, if you're just looking at the data, is making the bet that Biden is the person who has the best odds of beating Donald Trump, who they view as a major threat to their agenda and at this point to the country as a whole. So I don't blame the Democratic Party for making that decision. In fact, if it was all about winning the race and nothing more, then yeah, I think Biden is probably the right choice, even though I think there are real questions about whether he even makes it through a second term. At the same time, I can hold that I don't want to see this president in the White House for another 5 years, given what I've seen of him on the campaign trail, internationally, when he's speaking publicly, when he's being interviewed by journalists. I find a lot of it pretty concerning, to be honest. That being said, I am curious what you think about his age. Let us know in the comments. Leave your thoughts. Make an argument for or against Biden. I'd love to hear from some of our viewers about how they're viewing this upcoming election, both in the context of his opponent and also just in a vacuum. Speaking of comments, as always, before we get out of here, I want to address some reader comments from last week. A reader responding on our video about the Montana ruling that involved climate change said, "With regard to the comments about there being no effect whatsoever if all the carbon emissions were stopped right now, I can't help but remember the news stories, although minimal in amount for obvious big business reasons, that we saw during the COVID shutdown regarding the rapid reduction of air and water pollution. I remember side-by-side pictures of the air over cities depicting before and during the shutdown. I will never be convinced that doing nothing will have the same effect as doing all we can to save our environment." So this is actually a pretty good argument, and one I almost wish I thought of myself before we released this video last week. I think there is something we learned from the COVID pandemic, which is that when the country shuts down, we can see in real time how the environment changes. To be clear though, the point about stopping carbon emissions on a dime is not that the air won't clear up or that rivers won't get cleaner basically immediately. I think that's true. I think we can see when we shut all these things down, factories and cars and planes, we'll see some pretty immediate environmental impacts. The issue is more that in the short term, if you were to just stop all those emissions, you wouldn't right away see the effects of global warming totally reverse. Instead, we know from the many different kinds of models that climatologists run, it would take decades for our environment to process all the carbon we've already released and then to start reversing the effects of global warming and climate change that we've seen. So to that end, I do think that is a pretty fair point as it relates to Montana, and of course the fact that Montana is not the only emitter out there and many other countries would still be emitting greenhouse gases. All right, that is it for today's video. If you enjoyed this one, please hit subscribe, like the video, and turn on notifications. We're going to be bringing you more content in the future, and clicking that bell will keep you posted. And of course, we always want to hear your thoughts. So like I said, let us know what you think. Biden 2024, yay, nay, age up or down? I want to hear from you guys. We'll be right back here next week. Have a good one. Peace. God, I just dropped my computer in a really not nice way.